Teach us, Kevin.
Okay, it's for Shlema for Mocholim Israel and also the people that were injured and are in hospital recovering from this terrorist attack last night in Jerusalem. Okay, so continuing with the theme of exemptions in human court that brings destruction to the world. People that were wiped out by the flood. Okay, sorry, let's just go back one step. Bereshit Rabbah presents illustration of petty crimes that cannot be adjudicated in courts. This is what the people of the generation of the flood would do. A peddler would bring his cart of legumes into the marketplace. One person would come and steal legumes valued at less than a pruta, an amount that could not be claimed in court. And then another person would come and steal legumes valued at less than a pruta until there were no legumes left. So I think they did it deliberately, so they would steal, and it would be below the minimum value required, so they'd get away with it, knowing full well that was like a loophole, thinking they wouldn't get prosecuted. These people that were wiped out by the flood were law-abiding citizens who knew how to evade legal action. Therefore, they were careful to steal only the meager amount worth less than a pruta, so as to avoid prosecution in court. According to their mindset, if an act is not prosecutable, it is permissible, and exemption from restitution means that the act is legal and just. A society based on dispassionate and dry application of the law, without illumination of moral justice, will ultimately self-destruct and disappear from the world. In a society in which the code of justice can be turned on its head, criminals can view themselves as ethical paragons who conduct their affairs according to the law. Such a society is beyond repair and is doomed to annihilation.
Okay. On Kevin's theme, though, this is the point of Bava Kamma losing an eye for an eye, is that the bottom line is, since Moshe gave the rules at Har Sinai, there never was a case where they physically took an eye for an eye. Obviously, the Roman and Babylonian courts would, but the Talmudic courts would never do it. So why are we learning this in Bava Kamma? To tell you the various reasons about how we came to that conclusion. But one of the forceful arguments that's brought in the commentaries, even though it's not brought directly in the Gemara, is Jewish people are compassionate by nature. And therefore, if Jewish people are compassionate by nature, they don't get satisfaction if somebody took your eye out to take their eye out. It doesn't provide any sort of satisfaction. In other words, if you're not a cruel person, generally you would not like to see that sort of retribution. The second thing of it is it's not very practical. What are you going to do with somebody's cut out eye? Money is going to be more practical because you need money to recover and pay for various bills, etc. So we look at the practicality and we look at the sensitivity. So those principles are very much like what Kevin said, is that we do know the law in order to serve Hashem. We're not trying to circumvent the law. So Kev, it was actually apt that you taught that. So guys, if you remember, it was taught in a brisa. Rav Dostai ben Yehuda said, when the Torah states an eye for an eye, it refers to money. So you say that it refers to money, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it really refers to an actual eye. So to basically disabuse us of that notion, as the Gemara uses, I don't know why they use the word amata, to disabuse, but the bottom line is to dispel. I'd rather use the English word to dispel than their translation of the word, is that you could say as follows: it could either be money or it could be the eye. Because you could say where the eye of this one is large and the eye of this one is small, meaning either the victim or the assailant have got different sizes of organs, etc., and they might have a different value. How can I apply it? The concept of an eye for an eye, because bottom line is an eye for an eye implies a comparable deprivation. And if the assailant's eye is of unequal size, that the requirement isn't met. So it's saying in that case, you can maybe think that there's a monetary payment. Now, how do we know that you can't have both systems, money and literally a limb for a limb? Why can't you have both systems? In a case where the eyes are the same, you take out the assailant's eye for taking out the victim's eye. Or if they're not the same, you use money as restitution because it could be measured according to a specific formula. So the reason is that the Torah states, if you remember in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 24, verse 22, and it says, one law shall be for you, which teaches that there shall be the same law for all of you, so that the penalty for all wounding cases must be the same. Since we cannot blind the assailant in all cases because of this unequal disparaging value between the assailant and the victim's eye, we find that if we have to apply a homogeneous rule, then we rather extract money payment in all cases because that's measurable. It's not a case of sometimes there's a good fit and sometimes there's a bad fit. Now, just one thing I wanted to let you know, because Arthur was working hard this afternoon, is Arthur, when we refer to an eye, we don't mean that, because I've got actually like a small eye and they don't open very much. They're quite kind of Asian looking, except for the blueness. And I mean, I've got a friend of mine, it looks like he stuck his finger in a light socket because his eyes are permanently like this. In fact, when he talks to you like this, he's very emotive and it's like kind of scary first thing in the morning. So he's got those big eyes. So the Torah is not talking about physically necessarily of unequal eye value offer. It's talking about maybe somebody has got better sight and you've deprived that victim of their sight as a Air Force pilot, whereas the other person's like me, like -8 or 9 is like Stevie Wonder. I need braille, you know. So that's why I have to remember the duff. You guys think it's because I'm smart. It's because I can't read properly. So what choice do I have? So the thing of it is, we're saying that there's different levels of quality of eye. It doesn't mean necessarily the size. So in most cases, you're not going to have a match between the assailant and the victim. Why? Because generally a big guy bullies a smaller guy, so their eye size or quality is not going to be the same. Okay, so since you can't apply the loss of an actual eye in some cases and money exchange in others, because there shall be one law for all of you, as this teaches in the Torah, it says that maybe we can have a case where you actually remove the limb that you took from the victim, and maybe it's not about money. So how would we apply the law then? Because you can say, Arthur, a different concept, and this is what we went through, is we could say that it has nothing to do with the size of the eye or the quality of an eye. The assailant took out the victim's eye. Now he's blind in one eye. Therefore, the assailant needs his eye removed from the court, so he shall be blind in one eye. In other words, you can apply a general principle. You've made somebody dysfunctional, therefore you can take that dysfunctionality away from that person. So then you can do an eye for an eye because you're talking about a concept of either total blindness or partial blindness. Either one eye or two eyes gets taken out, and therefore it's restitution. How do you know this? Because it doesn't matter if one guy's slightly blinder than the other. The bottom line is if you can't see in that eye at all, it kind of equals the playing field. Do you know what I'm saying? And that assailant is going to feel what he's done to the victim. So therefore, you can take an eye for an eye and it would be equatable. It doesn't have to be of the same measurable quality. It's just what it's measuring there is functionality versus non-functionality. That's what you're actually measuring. And how can we prove this? Arthur, can you have an idea of how to prove this? Yeah?
And I can't in the room.
Oh, you can't? Okay.
Yeah, I'll get out the room if you want me to.
No, I don't want you to. I don't want you to. Just listen. Stay in the room with the guy. It's more of a mitzvah to stay in the room with the guy. So, all right, this is the case, guys. If I say there's a small man that was panicked when he was assaulted by a large man, okay? And therefore, he killed him, okay? Or a large man gave the small guy a clap and he brain damaged him and he's dead. Now, when you're starting to talk about this, do we still execute the murderer, guys? Yes or no? Guys, yes or no?
No.
If
No.
a man takes a life for a life, it's in Shmot Exodus chapter 21, verse 23. Do you take a life for a life, Kev?
Okay. In that situation, if the guy, I went over this, I'll try and get it over.
Sure, I'm listening.
If he's considered already dead, then you're not kidding. You haven't killed him.
You've gone ahead. That's excellent.
Oh, sorry.
I know
Okay.
you've done research. That's with regards to a
Sorry.
treifa. No, excellent. I know you've done the work. What we're saying here is, guys, is that what you're talking about, one eye is bigger than the other eye, or one eye is more proficient than the other guy's myopia. You can't do that because we don't apply that for rules of man and man with the death penalty. We don't say a rich person smacked a homeless drug addict, a crack addict, and therefore the crack addict was a thief. Say the crack addict needed his last drug fix, and he quickly broke in the car, and this big guy came out and gave him a smack, and he smashed his head on the concrete, and he killed this drug addict. Now, no one's going to mourn from the drug addict because he's a menace to society. But in that case, even the rich and powerful guy that supports a lot of people in Tzedakah, if he kills somebody, he pays because a life for a life. So you can't say, well, this guy's a bum and he doesn't contribute to society. Therefore, this guy that does contribute to society and maybe employs a lot of people, maybe he's not even a Baal Chesed. Maybe he's just got a big business and he's a ruthless guy, but he employs a lot of people, and killing him would lose all these people his jobs. So the Torah doesn't say, no, well, you can only, you can't kill this sort of person, or you can't. They don't say that. What the Torah says is you pay a soul for a soul. Meaning, if you took somebody's soul from the victim, the assailant will have his soul taken from him, the murderer. And here also in regard to an eye injury, we could say that the assailant took sight from his victim, sight. And therefore, the merciful one said in return, maybe we should take the sight from the assailant. So that brisa that we just did is not conclusive proof that an eye for an eye actually means monetary payment. Pretty good argument against monetary payment. Okay. So then the next attempt that the Gemara makes in terms of proof is from Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who says the Torah states an eye for an eye, it means payment with money. So you say that it means money, or perhaps it really means an actual eye. So to dispel us of this notion, you should say as follows. Where a person was blind and he blinded somebody else, or where he was an amputee and he severed the corresponding limb of someone else, or the lame guy crippled another guy, how can I fulfill the case of an eye for an eye? And this is where we're getting to Kevin's great point. In other words, from this perspective, the restitution is identical. The only problem is you can't take an organ for an organ because the oak already lost that organ. So, what do you do in that particular case? And if you say that this is, okay, an exceptional case, right? So in most cases, you can take an organ for an organ, except where the assailant is missing that organ. Then why can't you, in that case, take monetary payment, where the assailant pays the victim? But in most cases, you take the organ of the assailant, like organ for organ. Guys, give me a reason. Just give me one reason from where we just discussed it. Okay?
To take organ for organ, not money.
Yeah, I'm saying the suggestion from the Gemara is a person, you can't do the reciprocal organ for organ as payment when the person that attacks his victim has lost that particular organ he's deprived the victim of, because he doesn't have it to take back. So, in other words, a crippled guy, my favorite scene was that one where there was a guy in a wheelchair, and there were two guys traveling across the country, and he beat him up in a wheelchair. I'll think of what that movie is. Due Date. It was Due Date. Do you remember that, Arthur? So it was a very funny movie. Anyway, the bottom line is we're saying in those exceptional cases, you can't do the reciprocal penalty for an organ. So in that case, the assailant pays money. But why doesn't this work, guys? We just covered the rule in Leviticus chapter 24, verse 21, Vayikra. What did it say there? Guys, anybody can volunteer. I just went through it.
Why does it say this one? Why shouldn't you take an organ for an organ? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I'm saying, no. It's saying that generally you could think you could take an organ for an organ, but what happens if you've got a guy that causes the damage that himself doesn't have that organ that he damaged in somebody else? You can't
Because
take
he's not the original victim. Then he creates another victim.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Kev, okay.
There's you pay money.
There's you and me, right? We get into an altercation, okay, but I'm missing a leg. Okay, I'm missing my foot, not my leg, my foot. And what I do is we get in an altercation and I'm hobbling around, but I'm scared you're going to assault me. So I pick up a crowbar and smash your foot. Now your foot, your right foot, you can't use it anymore. But if the court swap an organ for an organ, they can't take my foot. It's already gone. So what do you do in those cases? And if in those cases, the Gemara is suggesting, well, maybe in those cases you do financial restitution. But generally, unless that weird case comes up, it's organ for organ. And the reason why you can't, guys, is again, from Leviticus chapter 24, verse 22, which says, there shall be one rule for all. In other words, either we're going to apply a organ for organ restitution or monetary restitution, but there can't be a double rule book. That's what the Gemara keeps reiterating from that pasuk in the Torah. Okay, so in this particular case, you're stuck with a problem, and that proves so far that it seems that it has to be money, because if the case is the exception, then it's the rule. So then how do you deal with it? Money. Money would fit all cases because it's a way to have a measuring tool according to the amount of damage caused. So the Gemara rebuts the proof and it says, listen, you can see there's a difficulty with understanding the verse literally. Why? Because perhaps where it's possible to fulfill an eye for an eye, it's possible and we do so. And where it's not possible to fulfill it, it's not. We don't do so. So what's it talking about there? Okay, so this is the point that Kevin's trying to say. If you do not argue with thus in this case, a treifa that kills a healthy person, what do we do with him? So we cannot execute him because he's considered legally dead. So let me just tell you where this was from. Gavin and I learned this from Rav Simcha Steinhauer in Gemara Sanhedrin 78a. Now, the rule is that a treifa, what is a treifa? So Arthur, treifa is a person or animal, either one, that possesses one of the well-defined group of physical defects that will cause his death in the future. In other words, cancer, a brain tumor, any of
Isn't it within a year?
Pardon? It has to be within. I don't know. I've got to go within Gemara. I have to go back to.
That's what I thought it was. That's what I heard.
It might
in a year, but I might be wrong.
No, you might be right, but I have to go back to Sanhedrin to check in the 78th time. I think you're probably right. If Rabbi Cohen said that, for sure you're right. But it's I've got Sanhedrin. It's in the second book, not the third. So I'll check. But basically, a treifa is somebody that's a dead man walking. For all intensive purposes, there was a movie with Susan Sarandon and Sean Penn called Dead Man Walking. It's a term when somebody's on death row and they can't make certain legal decisions because they're considered legally dead, because it's just a matter of time. So if a legally dead person kills somebody, how do you give them the reciprocal death penalty? You can't. So this is what it's suggesting here, is that in that particular case, what happens is it's just like this case of an eye for an eye or a foot for a foot or whatever. If the assailant is missing that organ and you can't swap it for the eye that he took from his victim, in that case, we just don't take the organ, because it's saying, listen, I understand that rule from Leviticus chapter 24, verse 22 to state that there shall be one law, but then have a law of organ restitution. In other words, an eye for an eye. But when it's not possible, like a treifa with a death penalty, that you can't give him the death penalty because nature will take its course, is that we drop the penalty. Since you can't have both, it would be a case where it would be an exemption and it would just be dropped. That's what the Gemara is trying to say. And where it's possible to impose the capital punishment, we do so. And where it's not possible, we exempt the murderer from punishment. Therefore, you don't need money as a compensation in these specific cases. So you can still interpret the Bryce as saying an eye for an eye. So therefore, it's not conclusive, it's a monetary payment. Do you get what I'm saying? So far, we've hit two issues which don't prove, hands down, it's a monetary payment. Can you see that, guys?
Yeah, but then how are they going to counter for the imbalance between the two items?
So what they say, okay, so that was mentioned in the first point. I'm just going to explain it to you, is that they're saying it depends how you define the word imbalance. So if we say imbalance in terms of sight, where somebody has got greater vision and another one is myopic or is colorblind, in that way, you equating it with quality or eyesight, physical eyesight, or maybe blue-eyed people are more sexy than brown-eyed people, or whatever case, whatever your measuring tool is. And therefore, you can't equate it. But the Torah says it doesn't really matter, because what's happened is you've got to look at the case of a death penalty. Just like we don't measure up when you're when a murderer kills somebody in society, and the murderer might be somebody that employs 3,000 people, and they would lose their jobs if this guy gets the death penalty, and all he did was smash a drug addict to death who was of no good to anybody. We still give him the death penalty. Now, how's that fair? Because the one was a Schott to society, and the one kept many people employed. So we say we don't work on that basis. In the Torah, if you take a soul from somebody, your soul is taken. And so too, if you take sight from somebody in one eye, your one eye is taken. If you take sight in both eyes are taken. It's not a qualitative measure. It doesn't have to be, because you're looking at it in a broader perspective, Gav. And therefore, it's not a proof that monetary payment is needed to get the measuring tool exact, because it's not equatable. It is a laugh for a laugh, an eye for an eye. You're using a different yardstick of measurement. Does that make sense? Because if you don't say that, and we say there's a qualitative difference, it's then you're never going to measure the same up, because you can say, but what did the drug addict contribute to society? And it says you shall not pay a ransom for his life, a life for a life. And even one of the three laws at which you have to give up your life, and you say there's a teenager who hasn't achieved anything other than bunking school, and the leader of the generation of the Jewish people, can't kill this teenage Jewish boy to save his life because he's more choshever. Because in God's eyes, we don't know whose blood is redder. So therefore, you can't use that measuring tool. Therefore, since you don't make it an equitable repayment through money, where you use exact measuring tools, you can still say it's an organ for an organ. Just like you replace a life for a life, you replace an eye for an eye. And we learn this from the halacha, from murder of a person to injury of a person. So it's not conclusive, it's money. That was the first case. And then the second case is, well, what happens if the person the assailant doesn't have that organ that he's damaged from the other person because it's already been removed from him? Whatever, it's a one-leg wonder, who knows? And he hit somebody else's leg, Kevin, with a crowbar. In that case, you can't give him the reciprocal leg for a leg because he doesn't have one. So we say maybe in that case use money. Then we say back to Leviticus chapter 24, verse 22. Can't have a double rule book of money or organ as restitution for an organ. You've got to choose. But I have to have one blanket rule book. So therefore, what do? The Gemara proposes, just like with a treifa murders somebody, you can't give a death penalty to a dead man walking because he's already dead technically. So too, if a guy's missing a leg, that would be an opportune time for him to take somebody else's leg, because nobody can take that right leg from him. It's gone already. So in that case, he's exempt. So therefore, if a person becomes a treifa and has cancer, They need to take out everybody in their life that's been an irritant, because they're not going to kill him. I'm kidding. It was your book, Ian. Remember, you and Ian, How to Get Off Murders.
No, and the problem is I'm not as good as him to finish that book. Unfortunately, I needed him to finish it because he's a genius.
He's a genius. So
my favorite.
So all right. So the Gemara is now offering another proof. That payment for damage is monetary. In other words, it's trying cat and mouse. So there's a sage of Rav Yishmael's academy that taught in a brisa. The verse states regarding one who wounded his fellow, so shall be given upon him. So what does it mean, so shall be given upon him? Well, firstly, it's in 2 verses before. It's in Leviticus chapter 24, verse 20, not 2022, because 2022 talks about one law overall. This is talking about restitution more like, okay? So when one wounds his fellow, so shall be given upon him, and there's no giving except of money. From here do we see that the assailant gives money as payment. So in other words, it's saying, listen, the Torah uses the term give. If you wound somebody, you shall get given a wound, so to speak. In other words, you shall give a wound on a person. What do you mean give? How do you give? So the only thing you can give is money. So it's saying that proves it's monetary. And then the Gemara said, no, it's not that obvious. Why? Because it could mean like you give a guy a good hiding. It doesn't mean that you give a guy money. You can say you give a guy a clap. It might not be a present he wants like money, but it's a clap. So therefore, it's also a gift. So then it's just gifts means an action. So then that's not a proof that it's a monetary payment. That could just mean an action taken, whether you give money, or alternatively, if you don't give money, you give the guy as good as he got you. Somebody took his organ, you take his organ. So the Gemara defends the Brise's exegesis, and they say the sage of Rav Yishmael's academy expounded a superfluous verse. What do you mean it was superfluous? That the Torah doesn't mean that the word giving is always monetary. It says rather it can have other connotations. Therefore, it's not necessary. What do you mean it's not necessary? Because it's written in the preceding verse, if a man gives a wound on his fellow as he did shall be done to him. So in other words, then afterwards you don't say you have to give a wound for a wound, because it already says if a man gives a wound on his fellow, as he did shall be done to him, which is proving that it's a reciprocal penalty and that the assailant is punished with an actual wound. It could be that. So we're saying, look, why do I need that extra repeated verse, shall be given upon him? In other words, that's a bit of repetition. So that's proving that because there's extra wording, that's coming to teach you that it actually means a payment of money, not the reciprocal wound infliction. Okay. In other words, if you're changing the language, so shall be done to him, to so shall be given upon him, the Torah alludes to a payment that can be given in the hands of the victim. Because what it's saying is in the English, we've got a term saying, I'll give him a club. But in Hebrew, it's very specific. It says, shall be done to him. So if you want to take somebody's organ, what you've done to a person shall be done to you. But if it talks about you shall give him restitution, it's talking about money. The Hebrew is more accurate than English. That's what the Gemara is saying. So that's seeming to prove that it's money. So the Gemara asks, but then why do I need the earlier part of verse 20? When one shall give a wound on a person. In other words, the necessary phrase, so shall be given upon him, can stand on its own. You don't need that extra sentence that says one shall give a wound, etc. So it's there to teach us what? That a monetary payment is required because there's an extra verse, and that extra verse is not necessary. So, so then it's saying, okay, I get that. So since the Torah needs to write, so shall be given upon him to teach us The payment for damage is monetary. It wrote also when one gives a wound on a person as its preface. Okay, so it's saying that the Hebrew is much more accurate than the English. Guys, I want to be in time for Rav Schottenstein house share. I know there's 8 minutes left, but I think it would be rude for us not to attend on time when we've already covered a lot of ground. And Arth, lovely to see you, mate. I hope you have a good day. What time tomorrow, guys? Quickly. 6:30.
Yeah, that's good for me.
Yeah, it's the usual time. So
Good.
Usual time's good. James, just one quick question before you go. It's
Yeah.
the similar applies if you don't have change, you can step in price.
What?
Remember that thing about that? The guy didn't like the money. So he says, okay, gave him a clap and said, keep the change.
Yes, I remember from Rabbi Cohen. Exactly. Do you remember that case by Rabbi Cohen when he said where there was that Rosha that had to pay a small monetary penalty every time he gave a clap? So he said, you know what, it's worth investment. And he gave the other guy a clap of his life. You remember that?
No, it was the one where the guy said he didn't like the coin.
Yeah, he didn't like the coin. He wanted change. So he gave him another clap. That's right.
Damon, can you just repeat the last point before we sign off?
Okay, the last point. Okay, so the last point is simple, that in Hebrew, it's not like English when you say you can give money or give a clap. It uses the word done for him, meaning a reciprocal wound, but it doesn't use that word. It says, shall be given upon him. And it also mentions the word, if a man gives a wound on his fellow, as he did so shall be done to him. And then it says also the term, and shall be given to him. So the very fact that it repeats the sentence number 1 is unnecessary. So it's coming to teach us to learn something, that it's money. And the reason it's money is because in Hebrew, when it's using the word give, it's not referring to reciprocal punishment of giving a wound because you got a wound, or the court giving a wound because you the assailant gave a wound to the victim. It's talking about giving money. Otherwise, it would say, for what you've done to the victim, the assailant will be done unto you. So if it was proving it was an eye for an eye, it would have used the word done, not give. That's the bottom line. The word give implies money. Okay. All right, guys, have a great evening.
You too, thanks.
Listen, tomorrow, 6:40, because you come back from Mariv at 6:30. So do Mariv at Shul, and when you come back, we'll do it immediately.
Are you talking about me?
Yes.
No, it was actually at 6:50.
Oh, dear. Well, what time do you want to do the shul tomorrow, guys? Whatever. Kevin, you should go to shul. Do you want to do it at 7? You guys call it. Whatever you want.
Yeah, 7 is good for me. Yeah.
All right. Arth? Gavin? Gav?
Yeah, fun for me.
7. Okay.